The handcuffs clicked shut around Sarah Chan's wrists with the same finality as a coffin lid closing. The metal was cold against her skin, but not as cold as the stares from the crowd that had gathered outside Murphy's Bar and Grill in downtown Columbus, Ohio. Cell phones were already recording, capturing what would become the next viral video about stolen valor and military fraud. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for impersonating a member of the United States military," announced Detective Martinez, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "You have the right to remain silent." Sarah stood quietly as he read her rights, her dark eyes scanning the faces around her. Some showed disgust, others curiosity, but all of them had already decided she was guilty. The Navy SEAL uniform she wore fit perfectly, every ribbon and badge positioned exactly where it should be. To the untrained eye, she looked like any other decorated veteran. But 3 actual Navy SEALs had walked into the bar an hour earlier, taken one look at her, and immediately called the police. "This is embarrassing," muttered one of the real SEALs, a massive man named Thompson whose biceps strained against his civilian clothes. "She's not even trying to hide it. Look at those ribbons. Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Combat Action Ribbon. Like she just picked the shiniest ones off a website." His buddy, Rodriguez, shook his head in disgust. "And the trident. Jesus. That's sacred, man. You don't just pin that on because it looks cool." The third SEAL, Johnson, was recording everything on his phone. "This is going straight to social media. Let everyone see what stolen valor looks like." Detective Martinez had seen cases like this before. Usually, it was some wannabe trying to impress women at bars or get military discounts at restaurants. They were typically easy to spot because they got basic details wrong. Wrong uniforms for the wrong branch, ribbons in the wrong order, insignia that didn't match their supposed rank. But Sarah Chan was different. Everything about her uniform was perfect, down to the smallest detail. "What's your name and unit?" Martinez asked as they walked toward his patrol car. "Sarah Chan, Lieutenant Commander, SEAL Team 6, she replied calmly. Thompson burst out laughing. "Team 6? Really? You're going with Team 6? Lady, that's like saying you're Batman." "And there's no such thing as a female SEAL," Rodriguez added. "Women aren't allowed in special operations. Everyone knows that." Sarah said nothing, but something flickered in her eyes. A flash of something that might have been anger, or pain, or maybe just resignation. The crowd was getting larger. Word had spread quickly through social media, and people were driving from across the city to see the woman who had dared to impersonate America's elite warriors. Veterans were particularly angry, their faces red with righteous indignation. "My brother died in Afghanistan," shouted one man from the crowd. "He earned his Purple Heart with blood. You're wearing that like it's a costume." "Throw her in jail," yelled another voice. Sarah kept her head high as Detective Martinez guided her into the back of the patrol car. She had known this day would come eventually. For 3 years, she had lived in plain sight, working as a bartender, keeping her head down, trying to blend into civilian life. But the uniform in her closet had called to her, especially on nights when the nightmares were particularly bad. "You know what really gets me," Thompson said to his friends as they watched the police car pull away, "is how detailed everything is. Like, whoever sold her that uniform really did their homework." Rodriguez nodded. "Even has the right name tape. Chun. Wonder if that's her real name or if she picked something that sounded military." Johnson was already uploading the video to TikTok with the caption, "Stolen Valor Exposed. Fake female Navy SEAL arrested in Columbus." At the police station, Sarah was processed like any other criminal. Fingerprints, mugshot, personal belongings confiscated and catalogued. The uniform that had felt like armor now felt like evidence against her. Detective Martinez had handled the case professionally, but she could see the disappointment in his eyes. He was a veteran himself, Army infantry who had served 2 tours in Iraq. Stolen valor cases were personal for him. "Look, Sarah," he said as they sat in the interrogation room, "I've seen a lot of these cases. Usually, people come clean pretty quick once they realize how much trouble they're in. Impersonating a military officer is a federal crime. You're looking at serious jail time." Sarah stared at the table between them. "What if I told you everything on that uniform was earned?" Martinez sighed. "Then, I'd say prove it. Show me your discharge papers." Your DD-214. Your orders. Anything that proves you served. I can't. Because they don't exist? Because they're classified. Martinez had heard that excuse before. Ma'am, discharge papers aren't classified. If you served, there would be records. Not for what I did. The detective studied her face, looking for tells that would give away the lie. But Saracen wasn't fidgeting or avoiding eye contact like most people did when they were caught in deception. She sat perfectly still, her posture ramrod straight, hands folded precisely in her lap. It was the bearing of someone who had been trained for military discipline. Okay, let's say I believe you, Martinez said, though he clearly didn't. Tell me about your service. I was recruited out of MIT in 2018. Computer science major with a focus on cybersecurity. The Navy needed someone who could handle both technical operations and direct action missions. Direct action? Killing people, Sarah said simply. Breaking things. Completing missions that officially never happened. Martinez made notes but remained skeptical. And, you just happened to be recruited for the most elite unit in the military? No basic training? No buds? No Hell Week? I did a modified training program. Accelerated. Different from the traditional pipeline because my role was different. How convenient. And, I suppose all records of this special program are classified too? Above your clearance level, yes. The interrogation continued for 2 hours, but Sarah's story never changed. She provided specific details about weapons, tactics, and operational procedures that impressed Martinez with their accuracy, but he chalked it up to extensive internet research. Anyone could learn military jargon online. Meanwhile, the story was exploding across social media. The hashtag #FakeFemaleNavySAL was trending nationwide. Military blogs picked up the story. Veterans groups organized to demand maximum prosecution. Cable news shows dedicated segments to the case, bringing on retired generals and former special operations personnel to discuss the problem of stolen valor. This is exactly what's wrong with our society, declared retired General Patterson on CNN. People think they can just put on a uniform and claim valor they never earned. This woman is spitting in the face of every person who ever served. The 3 SEALs who had identified Sarah became overnight celebrities in military circles. They were invited on podcasts, quoted in newspapers, and praised as heroes for exposing fraud. We knew something was off immediately, Thompson told reporters. Real SEALs can spot fake ones from a mile away. It's like an instinct. But not everyone was convinced the case was as simple as it appeared. Captain James Morrison, a Navy public affairs officer, received dozens of calls from reporters asking for official comment. Each time, he gave the same response: the Navy doesn't comment on ongoing criminal investigations. But, privately, something about the case bothered him. Morrison had been in the Navy for 23 years. He had worked with special operations forces throughout his career and knew that not everything they did appeared in official records. There were programs, missions, and operations that existed in the shadows, funded by black budgets and protected by layers of classification. He decided to make some discreet inquiries. The call came on a secure line at 11:47 p.m. Eastern Time. Morrison answered on the second ring. Captain Morrison? This is Admiral Richardson. I understand you've been asking questions about a Saracen. Morrison's blood went cold. Admiral Richardson was a legend in naval special operations, a man who had commanded some of the most sensitive missions of the past decade. He didn't make random phone calls to public affairs officers. Yes, sir. The stolen valor case in Columbus. Media's all over it. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Captain, I need you to listen very carefully. Do not discuss this case with anyone. Do not provide any information to the media beyond your standard no-comment response. This matter requires special handling. Sir, if I may ask, what's special about this particular case? We get stolen valor incidents all the time. Another pause, longer this time. Captain, some people wear uniforms they haven't earned. Others wear uniforms that officially, they never could have earned. Do you understand the distinction? Morrison felt his mouth go dry. Sir, are you saying I'm saying nothing over this line? But, I am flying to Columbus tomorrow morning. Do not let that woman talk to any more reporters or investigators until I arrive. The line went dead. Morrison stared at his phone, his mind racing. In 23 years of naval service, he had never received a call like that. Admiral Richardson didn't involve himself in routine criminal cases. He was the kind of officer who dealt with matters that could affect national security. Back in Columbus, Sarah Chan sat alone in her cell, staring at the concrete wall. She had known this day would come ever since she had decided to put on the uniform one more time. The nightmares had been getting worse, and wearing the clothes that connected her to her old life was the only thing that helped her sleep. She thought about her teammates, the men and women who had died on missions that would never be acknowledged. They deserved to be remembered, even if their names could never be carved into monuments or spoken at memorial services. Wearing the uniform was her way of honoring them. A guard approached her cell. "Chen, you got a phone call." Sarah looked up, surprised. She hadn't been allowed to make her one phone call yet, and she couldn't imagine who would be calling her. "Who is it?" "Lawyer, I think. Says his name is Colonel Williams." Sarah's heart stopped. Colonel David Williams had been her commanding officer on the most classified mission of her career. If he was calling, it meant someone very high up the chain of command knew about her arrest. She followed the guard to the phone, her mind racing through possibilities. None of them were good. "Sarah?" The voice on the other end was exactly as she remembered it. "Colonel. Are you hurt?" "No, sir." "Good. Listen carefully. Do not discuss your service record with anyone. Do not mention any operations. Do not provide any details about your training or assignments. Understand?" "Yes, sir." "But, sir, they're going to prosecute me. Federal charges." "No, they're not. Help is coming. Just keep quiet until tomorrow." "Sir, what about the team?" "They're being taken care of. Your record is being taken care of. Everything is being taken care of." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes for the first time since her arrest. "I miss them, sir. I know you do. We all do. But their sacrifice meant something, Sarah. Don't let anyone make you believe otherwise." The line went dead, and Sarah was escorted back to her cell. For the first time in hours, she felt something approaching hope. Outside the jail, the protesters were setting up for what they expected to be a long night. Signs reading "Stolen valor is stolen honor" and "Real heroes don't lie" dotted the crowd. Local news crews had established a perimeter, broadcasting live updates every hour. Thompson, Rodriguez, and Johnson held court near the main entrance, retelling their story to anyone who would listen. They had become the faces of the anti-stolen valor movement, at least for this particular case. The thing is, Thompson told a reporter from Fox News, real SEALs would never put women in combat roles. "It's not about sexism, it's about physical requirements and unit cohesion. This woman is living in a fantasy." Rodriguez nodded emphatically. "And the uniform? Perfect condition. Real combat uniforms show wear. They've been through hell." Hers looked like it came from a costume shop. What they didn't know was that Sarah's uniform had been through hell. It had been soaked in blood in Syria, torn by shrapnel in Somalia, and stained with tears in a dozen countries whose names appeared on no official mission reports. Detective Martinez worked late into the night, reviewing the case file and preparing for what he expected to be a straightforward prosecution. But Captain Morrison's call had planted seeds of doubt. "Martinez, you sure about this case?" asked Sergeant Wilson, who had been working stolen valor cases for 5 years. "Everything points to fraud. No service record, no discharge papers, story doesn't add up." "But..." Martinez hesitated. "But something's off. The way she carries herself, the way she talks about military stuff. And the uniform. It's too perfect. Even the way it's worn." "What do you mean?" "The ribbons, the insignia, even the way the fabric drapes. Someone put a lot of time and money into making this look authentic." Wilson shrugged. "Some people are really dedicated to their lies." As the night wore on, both men would discover just how wrong they were about the nature of lies, truth, and the price of keeping secrets that could get people killed. Admiral Richardson's plane touched down at John Glenn Columbus International Airport at 0630 hours, exactly as he had planned. The three-star admiral didn't travel commercial when dealing with matters of national security, and the unmarked military transport that carried him conveyed the gravity of the situation to anyone who knew how to read the signs. Captain Morrison waited in the terminal, having driven through the night from Norfolk. He had spent the early morning hours making discreet phone calls, trying to piece together information about Sarah Chen that seemed to exist in fragments scattered across the intelligence community. "Admiral, sir," Morrison stood as Richardson approached, his uniform bearing the casual confidence of a man who had commanded respect for 3 decades.
"Captain, brief me on the current situation."
As they walked toward Richardson's waiting car, Morrison outlined the events of the past 18 hours. The arrest, the media coverage, the growing public outcry, and the 3 SEALs who had become the face of the stolen valor accusation.
"Have you reviewed her service record?" Richardson asked.
"Sir, there is no service record. At least, none that I can access with my clearance level." Richardson stopped walking.
"Did you try the SOCOM database?"
"Yes, sir."
"No record. SAP archives?"
"Above my clearance, sir, but I put in the request through proper channels."
Richardson nodded grimly. Special access programs were compartmentalized beyond normal classification levels.
If Sarah Chen's service was buried that deep, it meant she had been involved in operations that officially never happened.
"Sir, may I ask what you know about this woman?"
The Admiral stared out the window at the Ohio countryside rushing past.
"What I know could compromise ongoing operations and endanger active personnel."
"What I can tell you is that sometimes the most important services to our country are the ones that can never be acknowledged." At the Franklin County Jail, Sarah had slept fitfully on the narrow cot, her dreams filled with memories she wished she could forget. She woke to the sound of keys rattling outside her cell, where a guard stood with an expression of confusion.
"Chen, you're being transferred." "Transferred where?" "Federal custody. Marshals are here to pick you up." Sarah frowned. Stolen valor cases were typically handled at the state level unless there were aggravating factors.
The involvement of federal marshals suggested someone had elevated the case significantly. 20 minutes later, she found herself in the back of an unmarked federal vehicle, her hands cuffed in front of her rather than behind. The 2 marshals, both veterans themselves, treated her with professional courtesy rather than the contempt she had experienced from local police. "Ma'am, we're taking you to a federal facility for questioning," explained Marshal Davis, a former Marine who had noticed something familiar about the way Sarah held herself.
"Am I being charged federally now?"
"That's above our pay grade. We're just transport." But Davis was curious. In 15 years as a federal marshal, he had transported hundreds of prisoners. Most were nervous, angry, or desperate. Sarah Chen displayed the calm acceptance of someone who had been in worse situations and survived.
"If you don't mind me asking," Davis said carefully, "where did you serve?" Sarah met his eyes in the rearview mirror.
"Places that don't exist on maps." Davis felt a chill run down his spine.
He knew that answer.
He had given it himself when civilians asked about his time with Force Recon in classified theaters. Meanwhile, the media circus outside the jail was growing by the hour. News vans from major networks had joined the local crews, and the story was becoming a national sensation. The 3 SEALs who had identified Sarah were giving interviews to anyone with a microphone.
"This is bigger than just one person," Thompson declared on Good Morning America via satellite. "This is about protecting the integrity of our military. When people pretend to be what they're not, it diminishes the real heroes who paid the ultimate price." Rodriguez appeared on CNN, his message equally forceful.
"She's making a mockery of every SEAL who earned his trident through blood, sweat, and sacrifice.
There are no female SEALs. Period." Johnson was particularly passionate during his Fox News interview.
"What really gets me is how she doubled down on the lie.
Even after being caught red-handed, she's still claiming she served. That takes some serious nerve."
Social media was ablaze with commentary from military personnel and veterans advocacy groups. The consensus was overwhelming: Sarah Chen was a fraud who deserved the harshest possible punishment. But there were a few voices of caution. Retired Navy Captain Susan Martinez, now a defense contractor with extensive special operations experience, posted a thoughtful thread on Twitter: "Before we rush to judgment, remember that some military service exists in shadows. Not everything that serves national security appears in public records." I'm not defending anyone, just suggesting we let facts emerge before destroying someone's life. Her post was immediately attacked by other veterans, who accused her of enabling stolen valor and disrespecting authentic service members. At the federal facility, Sarah was processed into a holding cell that was marginally more comfortable than the county jail. She was given a clean orange jumpsuit and allowed to shower for the first time since her arrest. As she stood under the hot water, she tried to prepare herself mentally for whatever was coming next. Admiral Richardson arrived at the facility at 1,100 hours, accompanied by Captain Morrison and a woman Sarah didn't recognize. Through the security glass, she could see them talking with federal officials, their conversation animated but controlled. "Shen," called a guard, "you have visitors." Sarah was escorted to a conference room that was clearly designed for sensitive conversations. No windows, soundproofed walls, and a metal detector that all visitors had to pass through. She sat at a metal table, her hands cuffed to a chain around her waist. The door opened, and Admiral Richardson entered, followed by the others. Sarah immediately came to attention as much as her restraints allowed, her training overriding the strange circumstances. "Sit down, Lieutenant Commander," Richardson said quietly. Sarah's eyes widened. It was the first time anyone had used her actual rank since her arrest. "Sir, before you say anything, let me introduce NSA Deputy Director Sarah Williams and Captain Morrison from Naval Public Affairs. Everything we discuss here is classified at the Special Access Program level. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." Richardson studied her face carefully. "Sarah, I need you to roll up your left sleeve." Confused but obedient, Sarah worked her cuffed hands to push up the orange sleeve of her jumpsuit. On her left forearm, just below her elbow, was a small tattoo that appeared to be Chinese characters at first glance. Richardson leaned closer, then nodded to Deputy Director Williams. "Can you read what that says?" Williams adjusted her glasses and examined the tattoo. "It's not Chinese. It's a code. Looks like coordinates?" "Not coordinates," Richardson said quietly. "It's a mission identifier. Romeo 77 Delta. Operation Nightingale." Captain Morrison looked confused. "Sir, I've never heard of that operation." "Because it never officially happened," Deputy Director Williams explained. "And the 12 people who participated in it were sworn to secrecy under the Espionage Act." Richardson sat down across from Sarah. "Tell me about Damascus." Sarah's composure finally cracked. Tears began flowing down her cheeks as memories flooded back. 36 hours behind enemy lines. Chemical weapons facility. We lost Martinez and Thompson in the initial breach. And the primary objective? Secure the research data and eliminate the laboratory. Secondary objective was to extract Dr. Hassan before he could be moved to Iran. Richardson nodded. "What happened to Dr. Hassan?" "He was killed during the extraction attempt. Sniper fire from a building we hadn't cleared. I carried his body out because you don't leave people behind. Even enemy scientists?" "He wasn't the enemy, sir. He was being forced to work for them. His family was being held hostage." Deputy Director Williams was taking notes, cross-referencing Sarah's answers with classified files on her laptop. "The tattoo," she said to Richardson. "Only mission participants were given those identifiers." Richardson stood and began pacing. "Sarah, I need you to tell me why you put that uniform back on." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The nightmares were getting worse. PTSD, the doctors say. Wearing the uniform was the only thing that helped me remember who I used to be. Who my team used to be. Your team? Rodriguez bought it in Somalia 3 months after Damascus. IED during a vehicle patrol. Williams took a bullet in Ukraine while protecting a defector. Jackson died in a training accident that wasn't really an accident. Someone wanted to silence him permanently. Richardson's face grew dark. What do you mean by that? Jackson found evidence that someone in the chain of command was selling mission intel to hostile forces. He was going to report it when his parachute failed. Captain Morrison looked between Richardson and Williams. Sir, are you saying this woman is actually Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, United States Navy, Special Operations Command?
Recruited directly from MIT under a classified program designed to integrate cyber warfare specialists into direct action teams.
Williams closed her laptop.
Admiral, we have a problem.
If her service record is legitimate, then we've allowed her to be publicly humiliated and arrested for stolen valor.
The media coverage could expose classified programs. Richardson nodded grimly. And if we clear her name publicly, we confirm the existence of programs that are supposed to remain hidden. What about the 3 SEALs who identified her?
Thompson, Rodriguez, and Johnson are legitimate SEALs, but they wouldn't have knowledge of special access programs.
To them, Sarah Chen doesn't exist in any system they can access. Sarah spoke up quietly.
Sir, I never meant for this to become public. I was just trying to cope with losing my team.
Richardson sat back down. Sarah, I need to ask you something important. Are you willing to continue keeping your service record classified, even if it means people will always believe you're a fraud? Sarah was quiet for a long moment.
Sir,
what about the families of my teammates?
They deserve to know their loved ones died serving their country.
Their families have been told their loved ones died in training accidents or other incidents. For national security reasons, that's the story that has to stand. Even if it means they never get the recognition they deserve?
Sarah, there are thousands of service members who have given their lives in operations that will never be acknowledged.
It's the price of protecting national security. Sarah stared at the table. And if I refuse to keep quiet? Deputy Director Williams leaned forward.
Then, you'll be charged under the Espionage Act for revealing classified information.
You'll spend the rest of your life in federal prison. And if I keep quiet?
The stolen valor charges will be dropped quietly, Richardson explained.
You'll be released, but the public will always believe you're a fraud.
You'll never be able to prove your service was legitimate. Captain Morrison finally understood the gravity of the situation. Sir, this woman has been publicly humiliated, called a liar and a fraud, and now you're asking her to accept that permanently to protect classified programs?
Captain, this is how special operations works.
Sometimes the mission requires sacrificing your reputation, your relationships, even your life.
Lieutenant Commander Chen knew that when she accepted this assignment.
Sarah raised her eyes to meet Richardson's.
What would happen if I died in custody? Suicide, maybe. Depression over being caught in a lie. Richardson's face went pale. Sarah, no. Don't even think about that. But it would solve the problem, wouldn't it? No more questions about my service record.
No risk of classified information being exposed. The 3 SEALs who exposed me become heroes who caught a fraud. Williams slammed her laptop shut.
Admiral, we cannot ask this woman to sacrifice her life to protect our operational security.
I'm not asking her to, Richardson said firmly.
Sarah, there has to be another way. Sarah smiled sadly. Sir, there is another way.
But it requires you to trust that I can handle one more classified mission.
What do you mean? Let me disappear. New identity, new location, new life.
The woman who was arrested for stolen valor vanishes from federal custody. Maybe she escapes, maybe she's transferred to a different facility and lost in the system. People will assume justice was done quietly.
Richardson considered the proposal. And you're willing to live the rest of your life as someone else? Never able to claim credit for your service? Sir, I've been living as someone else for 3 years already.
At least this way, the program stays protected and the real SEALs who exposed me don't get punished for doing their job. Captain Morrison was amazed by what he was witnessing. Sir, this woman is offering to sacrifice her entire identity to protect national security.
It's what we do, Sarah said simply. We take the risks and pay the prices so others don't have to. Deputy Director Williams was already making phone calls to arrange the logistics of Sarah's disappearance from federal custody. It would require coordination between multiple agencies and careful manipulation of records, but it could be done.
Sarah, Richardson said as they prepared to leave, I want you to know that your service mattered. Your team's sacrifice mattered. Even if the world never knows your names, I will never forget what you did for your country.
Sarah stood as much as her restraints allowed.
Sir, there's one more thing. The real reason I put the uniform back on.
What's that?
I wanted to feel worthy of it one more time. After losing my team, after watching everything we fought for get buried in classified files, I needed to remember that once upon a time, I was a United States Navy SEAL. Even if I can never prove it. Richardson reached across the table and shook her cuffed hand. Lieutenant Commander, you'll always be a SEAL. Nothing can change that. As the three officials left the conference room, Sarah sat alone with the weight of the decision she had made. Tomorrow, the woman who had been arrested for stolen valor would disappear. The real story would remain buried in classified files. And, somewhere in America, a woman with a new name and a new life would carry the memories of fallen heroes that the world would never be allowed to honor. Outside the federal facility, the media was reporting that Sarah Chen had been transferred to federal custody for additional charges. The three SEALs who had exposed her were being hailed as heroes for protecting military honor. Veterans groups were calling for maximum prosecution. None of them knew that they were demanding justice against one of the most decorated special operations veterans in recent history. None of them knew that the woman they were condemning had earned every ribbon, every medal, and every bit of honor they thought she had stolen. Sometimes the truth is more classified than the lies. The plan to make Sarah Chen disappear required the kind of precision that had made her such an effective special operations officer. Deputy Director Williams worked through the night, coordinating with the Bureau of Prisons, the U.S. Marshals Service, and several agencies whose names appeared on no public organizational charts. At 0347 hours, a carefully orchestrated series of events began to unfold. A prisoner transport van arrived at the federal facility, its paperwork indicating a routine transfer to a maximum security facility in Colorado. The two guards who signed for Sarah Chen had clearances that allowed them to ask no questions about their cargo. Sarah was led to the van in full restraints, her head covered with a hood as was standard for high-security transfers. The media crews camped outside the facility recorded the departure, noting it for their morning broadcasts. Justice was being served, they reported. The fake Navy SEAL was being moved to face federal prosecution. What the cameras didn't capture was the van's first stop, 30 miles outside Columbus. In a rural parking lot where no surveillance cameras operated, Sarah Chen stepped out of the prisoner transport van and into a different life. The restraints were removed, the orange jumpsuit replaced with civilian clothes. The woman who climbed into the waiting sedan had new identification, a new social security number, and a new name, Elizabeth Morgan. "How do you feel about being dead?" asked the driver, a woman named Agent Carter whose job title existed only in classified briefing documents. "Lighter than I expected," Sarah replied, running her fingers through hair that had been cut and dyed during the brief stop. How long before Sarah Chen officially dies? Prison suicide, 3 days from now. Depression over being caught in her elaborate lie. Very sad. Very final. The sedan drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward a safe house in Kentucky, where Sarah would spend 2 weeks being debriefed and prepared for her new existence. The process was familiar to her. She had helped create new identities for assets and defectors during her operational years. Now she was experiencing it from the other side. Meanwhile, the prisoner transport van continued toward Colorado with a cargo container that appeared to hold a prisoner but contained only weighted mannequin. The paperwork would show that Sarah Chen had been successfully transferred, and any follow-up inquiries would be lost in bureaucratic delays until her reported death made them irrelevant. Back in Columbus, the morning news shows were declaring victory for military honor and integrity. The three SEALs who had exposed the fraud were scheduled to appear on multiple networks, their story becoming a symbol of how authentic warriors protected their brotherhood from imposters. "This case shows that the military community polices itself," Thompson told NBC's Today Show. "We don't tolerate people who try to steal our honor." Rodriguez appeared on Fox and Friends with an equally strong message. "Real SEALs know real SEALs." This woman thought she could fool everyone, but you can't fake the brotherhood. Johnson used his CNN appearance to make a broader point about stolen valor. It's not just about one person wearing a uniform they didn't earn. It's about the message it sends to real veterans and to the families of those who died serving. The interviews were professional, passionate, and completely sincere. Thompson, Rodriguez, and Johnson genuinely believed they had exposed a dangerous fraud. They had no way of knowing that the woman they had arrested possessed more legitimate special operations experience than all three of them combined. Admiral Richardson watched the coverage from his Pentagon office, a coffee cup growing cold in his hands. Each interview drove home the impossible situation they had navigated. Protecting national security had required allowing 3 honorable SEALs to unknowingly destroy the reputation of an even more honorable warrior. Captain Morrison knocked on the Admiral's door, carrying a folder marked with Special Access Program classifications. "Sir, the final debrief on the Chen case." Richardson accepted the folder but didn't open it immediately. "How is she adjusting?" "Better than expected. Agent Carter reports that she's adapting well to her new identity. Her psychological profile suggests she'll be able to maintain operational security indefinitely." "And her mental health?" Morrison hesitated. "Sir, the PTSD symptoms that led to this situation haven't disappeared. Dr. Reynolds recommends ongoing therapy, but obviously it has to be with cleared personnel who can't ask questions about her background." Richardson finally opened the folder and reviewed the psychological assessment. Sarah Chen had scored perfectly on all operational readiness metrics, but the trauma indicators were concerning. Losing her entire team in classified operations had left scars that civilian identity couldn't heal. "Captain, I want you to set up a support network for her. Other personnel from similar programs who have transitioned to civilian life. People who understand what she's been through." "Sir, that would require identifying other operatives from classified programs. Then, we identify them. These people serve their country in ways that can never be acknowledged publicly. The least we can do is make sure they're not suffering alone." 3 time zones away, the woman formerly known as Sarah Chen was learning how to be Elizabeth Morgan. The safe house in Kentucky was comfortable but sterile, designed for functionality rather than comfort. She spent her days reviewing her new background and practicing behaviors that would help her blend into civilian life. "Your employment history shows 5 years as an IT consultant," Agent Carter explained during one of their sessions. "You specialized in cybersecurity for small businesses. Nothing glamorous, but it explains any technical knowledge you might display." "And my military experience?" "None. Elizabeth Morgan never served. She's actually rather critical of military spending and foreign interventions." Ironic, but it's the best cover. Sarah found the irony bitter rather than amusing. After sacrificing so much for her country, she would have to spend the rest of her life pretending to oppose the very values she had nearly died defending. "What about personal relationships? Friends, family, romantic partners?" Agent Carter's expression grew sympathetic. "Sarah, you have to understand that Elizabeth Morgan is essentially a person in witness protection. Deep cover that can never be blown. That means limited personal attachments. No close friendships that might lead to questions about your past. So I'm not just losing my identity. I'm losing any chance at a normal life. I know it's hard. But it's the price of protecting operations that are still ongoing." Sarah stared out the window at rolling Kentucky hills. "Agent Carter, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think what we're doing is worth it? All the sacrifice, all the secrecy, all the lies?" Carter considered the question carefully. "Sarah, I've been in this business for 15 years. I've seen operations save thousands of lives, prevent terrorist attacks, and stop wars before they could start. But I've also seen good people destroyed by the weight of carrying secrets. That's not really an answer. Because there isn't a clear answer. What I can tell you is that the mission you completed in Damascus saved American lives. The chemical weapons research you destroyed would have been used against our allies. Dr. Hassan's data prevented those weapons from being replicated." Sarah felt tears threatening again. "But my team died for it. And nobody will ever know. Your team died as heroes. The fact that their heroism is classified doesn't make it less real." That evening, Sarah received her first communication from her new support network. The message came through encrypted channels, from someone identifying themselves only as Philadelphia. "Elizabeth, heard you joined the club. Been here 8 years now. It doesn't get easier, but it gets manageable. If you need someone who understands, I'm here." Over the following days, similar messages arrived from other former operatives living under assumed identities. Detroit had been a CIA operative whose cover was blown during an extraction mission in Eastern Europe. Seattle was a former Army Special Forces medic who had conducted medical missions in countries where America wasn't supposed to have personnel. Each message carried the same theme: you're not alone in this.
Back in Ohio, Detective Martinez was filing his final report on the Sarah Chin case. The federal transfer had closed his involvement, but something continued to bother him about the entire situation. "Wilson, you ever have a case that felt wrong even when all the evidence pointed to guilt?" Sergeant Wilson looked up from his own paperwork. "What do you mean?" "The Chan woman." Everything about the case made sense, but something felt off. "Like what?" Martinez struggled to articulate his concerns. The way she carried herself. The way she talked about military procedure. Even the way she wore that uniform. It wasn't like someone playing dress up. Wilson shrugged. "Some people are really good at pretending." "Maybe. But I've arrested a lot of pretenders over the years. They usually crack under pressure or get basic details wrong." She never did. "Martinez, sometimes you just have to accept that people are more committed to their lies than you expect." But Martinez wasn't convinced. That afternoon, he made a decision that would haunt him for years. He called Captain Morrison at Naval Public Affairs. "Captain, this is Detective Martinez from Columbus PD. I handled the initial arrest on that stolen valor case." "Detective, what can I do for you?" "I know the case has been transferred to federal custody, but I was wondering if you could tell me anything about the outcome." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Detective, I'm afraid I can't discuss ongoing federal investigations." "I understand. It's just that something about the case didn't sit right with me." Another pause, even longer. "Detective Martinez, let me ask you something. In your experience, when someone is caught in a lie, do they usually maintain that lie even when it means federal prosecution?" "No, sir. Most people break pretty quick when they realize how serious the charges are." "And did Miss Chen ever change her story?" Martinez thought back to the interrogation. "No, sir. Never wavered. Even when I explained the potential penalties." "I see. Detective, if I may ask, what's your military background?" "Army infantry. 2 tours in Iraq." Captain Morrison was quiet for almost a minute. When he spoke again, his voice was careful and measured. "Detective, sometimes people maintain their stories because they're telling the truth, even when the truth seems impossible to believe." The line went dead, leaving Martinez staring at his phone with more questions than answers. 3 days later, the news broke that Sarah Chen had committed suicide in federal custody. The reports described a woman overcome with shame and depression after being caught in an elaborate fraud. Veterans groups used her death as a cautionary tale about the psychological consequences of stolen valor. The 3 SEALs who had exposed her were quoted in the obituary coverage, expressing sympathy for Chen's family while maintaining that justice had been served. "It's tragic that it ended this way," Thompson told reporters. "But maybe her death will deter others from trying to steal military honor." What Thompson didn't know was that Sarah Chen's death was as fictional as the life Elizabeth Morgan had begun living in a small town in Montana. The woman he thought had committed suicide was actually working the night shift at a 24-hour diner, serving coffee to truckers and trying to build a life that would never be connected to her past. Elizabeth Morgan was polite but distant with customers. She paid her rent on time, kept to herself, and showed no interest in discussing politics or military affairs. Her co-workers considered her quiet but reliable. Her landlord appreciated that she never caused problems. Nobody suspected that the woman refilling their coffee had once infiltrated a chemical weapons facility in Syria, eliminated 6 enemy combatants in close-quarters combat, and carried vital intelligence through 36 hours of hostile territory. Late at night, when the diner was empty except for the occasional long-haul driver, Elizabeth would sometimes touch the spot on her arm where her tattoo had been. The coordinates had been removed with laser surgery, along with several other distinguishing marks that might have connected her to Sarah Chen. The physical scars were gone, but the memories remained. Damascus, Somalia, Ukraine. Training accidents that weren't accidents. Teammates who had died for operations that officially never happened. In her apartment above a used bookstore, Elizabeth kept a small box hidden beneath loose floorboards. Inside were the only physical reminders of her previous life, a single dog tag that had belonged to Rodriguez, a photo of her team taken during training, and a letter from Colonel Williams commending her performance on Operation Nightingale. These items were dangerous to keep. If discovered, they could compromise her new identity and expose classified programs.
But they were all she had left of the people who had known Sarah Chen, who had understood what she had sacrificed for her country. Sometimes she would hold Rodriguez's dog tag and remember the morning he had been killed by an IED in Somalia. He had been 26 years old, engaged to a teacher from San Diego who thought he had died in a training accident. His fiancée would never know that he had died trying to rescue kidnapped aid workers, or that his final words had been concern for the safety of civilians. Williams had been 32 when he took a bullet protecting a Russian defector with information about human trafficking networks. His parents thought he had died in a parachuting accident. They would never know their son had saved thousands of potential victims with his sacrifice. Jackson had discovered evidence of intelligence leaks that could have compromised dozens of ongoing operations. His training accident had been carefully orchestrated by someone who wanted to silence him. Elizabeth was the only person left alive who knew the truth about his murder. These were the ghosts that haunted Elizabeth Morgan's new life. Heroes whose names would never be carved in stone, whose stories would never be told, whose families would never know the truth about their sacrifice. The support network of former operatives provided some comfort, but it was limited by the same operational security that governed Elizabeth's existence. They shared experiences through coded communications, offering sympathy and understanding without ever meeting face to face. Philadelphia had helped her understand the stages of grief that came with losing not just teammates but an entire identity. Seattle provided practical advice about maintaining cover while dealing with PTSD symptoms. Denver shared techniques for building superficial relationships without risking emotional attachment that could lead to dangerous questions. But, late at night, when the diner was quiet and the Montana sky stretched endlessly overhead, Elizabeth Morgan felt the weight of carrying secrets that could never be shared with anyone who hadn't lived the same shadow existence. She was alive, which was more than her teammates could say. She was free, after a fashion. But she was also dead to everyone who had ever known Sarah Chen, buried as completely as if her fictional suicide had been real. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent years infiltrating enemy territory under false identities, pretending to be someone she wasn't in order to complete missions. Now she would spend the rest of her life doing the same thing, not for national security, but simply to protect the secrets of missions that had already been completed. Elizabeth Morgan was the perfect cover identity, but she would never be real in the way that Sarah Chen had been real. She was a ghost pretending to be alive, a hero forced to deny her own heroism, a warrior condemned to live in peace that had been purchased with the blood of friends who could never be mourned publicly. As dawn broke over the Montana mountains, Elizabeth finished her shift at the diner and walked home through streets where nobody knew her name, her history, or the price she had paid for their safety. It was the loneliest freedom imaginable, but it was the life she had chosen to protect the secrets that kept America safe. The woman the world believed was dead had never been more alive, and never more alone. 6 months after Sarah Chen's reported suicide, Elizabeth Morgan had settled into a routine that might have looked like a normal life to outside observers. She worked at the diner, paid her bills, and occasionally made small talk with customers about weather and local sports. But, beneath the surface, she remained what she had always been, a weapon waiting to be activated. The activation came on a Tuesday morning when a customer she'd never seen before ordered black coffee and left a newspaper folded to the crossword puzzle. The seemingly innocent gesture triggered tradecraft Sarah had learned years ago. Certain answers in the puzzle, when decoded, revealed a message: asset compromised. Extraction necessary. Confirm receipt. Elizabeth's blood went cold as she processed the implications. Someone from her old life had found her, which should have been impossible given the layers of security protecting her new identity. But the code was authentic, using protocols known only to a handful of special operations personnel. She confirmed receipt by completing the crossword with specific answers that would signal her understanding. The stranger returned the next day, ordered the same black coffee, and collected the newspaper. No words were exchanged, but Elizabeth knew her quiet life in Montana was about to end. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday night at an abandoned gas station 30 miles outside town. Elizabeth arrived early, checking the perimeter with skills that had never left her. When headlights approached at exactly midnight, she recognized the tactical driving patterns of someone with advanced security training. The driver was a woman approximately Elizabeth's age, moving with the controlled grace that marked her as military. In the darkness, Elizabeth could see the telltale signs of someone carrying concealed weapons. "Sarah Chen," the woman asked quietly. "Sarah Chen is dead. My name is Major Lisa Park, Army Intelligence. I need to speak with you about Operation Nightingale."
Elizabeth felt her stomach drop. Operation Nightingale had been classified at levels that supposedly made it untouchable. If someone was investigating it now, something had gone very wrong. I don't know what you're talking about. Major Park stepped closer, her voice carrying urgent authority. 3 days ago, someone tried to kill Colonel Williams. The assassination attempt failed, but whoever ordered it knows about Damascus. They know about your team. And they know you're still alive. The words hit Elizabeth like a physical blow. Colonel Williams had been the commanding officer who had helped orchestrate her disappearance. If he was being targeted, it meant someone had connected the dots between Operation Nightingale and current events. How do you know about my current identity? Because Colonel Williams gave me the information before they put him in protective custody. He said if anything happened to him, I should find you and deliver a message. Elizabeth waited, her mind already running through escape routes and contingency plans. The message is, Jackson was right about the leak, and now they're cleaning house. The reference to Jackson, her murdered teammate, confirmed the authenticity of the communication. Jackson had discovered evidence of intelligence being sold to foreign assets, evidence that had gotten him killed in what appeared to be a training accident. What do you want from me? Major Park opened a briefcase and removed a tablet displaying classified documents. We need your help to identify the source of the leak. You were there for Operation Nightingale. You knew the personnel, the timeline, the operational details. Most importantly, you knew Jackson's investigation. Elizabeth studied the documents, recognizing names and dates from the darkest period of her military service. Why now? It's been 3 years. Because the same intelligence network that Jackson discovered is being used to target current operations. American personnel are dying because someone is selling mission details to hostile forces. The weight of the revelation settled over Elizabeth like a familiar burden. Even in her new life, the shadows of her past were reaching out to claim more victims. If I help you, my cover is blown. Elizabeth Morgan disappears, and I'm back to being a target. If you don't help us, more American service members die. Including some who might be working with your old teammates' replacements. Major Park had found the one argument that Elizabeth couldn't ignore. The possibility that her inaction might lead to deaths similar to those of Rodriguez, Williams, and Jackson. What would you need from me? Access to Jackson's research. He shared his findings with someone before he died. We think it was you. Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment, weighing operational security against moral obligation. Finally, she nodded toward the abandoned gas station office. Give me 10 minutes to retrieve something. She disappeared into the darkness, returning with a small device that looked like an ordinary USB drive. Jackson gave me this the night before he died. Said it was insurance in case something happened to him. Major Park accepted the drive with the reverence due to evidence purchased with blood. What's on it? Financial records, communication intercepts, travel patterns. Everything he collected about the intelligence leak. He suspected someone in the chain of command was selling operational details, but he couldn't identify the specific individual. Did you review the contents? Elizabeth shook her head. Jackson said it was safer if I didn't know the details. My job was to keep it secure until someone legitimate could use it. Major Park connected the drive to her tablet, immediately recognizing the professional quality of Jackson's intelligence analysis. Bank transfers, encrypted communications, and personnel movements formed a pattern that painted a clear picture of systematic betrayal. This is incredible work. Jackson was close to identifying the source when he was killed. Who do you think it is? Major Park's expression grew grim. The data points to someone with access to special access programs across multiple agencies. Someone who knew about Operation Nightingale before it was executed. Elizabeth felt a chill of recognition. Someone who would have known the team composition, the target location, and the extraction routes. Someone who might have compromised the mission from the beginning. The implications were staggering. If Operation Nightingale had been compromised from the start, it meant Elizabeth's teammates had walked into a trap that could have been avoided. Major Park, there's something else you need to know about Damascus. What? Elizabeth's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. The Syrian forces were waiting for us. They knew exactly when and where we would infiltrate the facility. We assumed it was bad luck or superior enemy intelligence. but now you think it was the leak. I think Rodriguez and Williams died because someone sold them out. Major Park reviewed Jackson's data with new understanding. If that's true, then the current operations being compromised represent an ongoing pattern that started with your mission. And the people responsible for my teammates' deaths are still in positions to kill more Americans. The realization carried a weight that transformed Elizabeth's grief into something approaching rage. Her teammates hadn't died because of operational hazards or enemy superiority. They had been murdered by betrayal from within their own command structure. What do you need me to do? Major Park studied her face carefully. This investigation requires someone with intimate knowledge of Operation Nightingale and the personnel involved. Someone who can identify patterns that outsiders might miss. You want me to come back? Temporarily. Under a new cover identity with full government protection. Help us catch the people who killed your team, then return to your civilian life with enhanced security. Elizabeth looked out at the Montana landscape that had become her sanctuary. Leaving meant abandoning the fragile peace she had built, but staying meant allowing Jackson's killers to continue their betrayal. If I agree, I want certain conditions. Name them. First, when this is over, I want my teammates' families to know the truth about how they died. Not the classified details, but the fact that they died as heroes, not in training accidents. Major Park nodded. I'll see what can be arranged. Second, I want protection for the other operatives in my support network. If my cover is blown, theirs might be compromised too. Agreed. Elizabeth took a deep breath. Third, when we identify the source of the leak, I want to be the one who takes them down. Major Park hesitated. That might not be possible. There are legal procedures, jurisdictional issues. Major, these people killed my friends and betrayed their country. If you want my cooperation, that's non-negotiable. The two women stared at each other across the darkness, each recognizing a familiar determination in the other. Agreed, Major Park said finally. But it has to be done legally and officially. As long as it gets done. They spent the next hour reviewing operational details and timeline requirements. Elizabeth would have 72 hours to arrange her disappearance from Montana before assuming a new identity in Washington, D.C. Major Park would coordinate with the agencies responsible for Elizabeth's original cover to ensure seamless transition. As they prepared to leave, Major Park handed Elizabeth a secure communications device. If you change your mind or encounter any problems, use this. Otherwise, we'll see you in D.C. Elizabeth watched the Major's vehicle disappear into the Montana night, then stood alone in the darkness contemplating the choice she had made. 6 months of careful anonymity were about to be sacrificed for the chance to bring justice to her murdered teammates. But, as she thought about Rodriguez's fiancé, Williams's parents, and Jackson's brother, all of whom believed their loved ones had died in accidents, she knew she couldn't walk away. Some debts could only be paid with action. The drive back to town gave her time to plan her exit from Elizabeth Morgan's life. The diner job would be abandoned with minimal notice. The apartment lease would be broken. The carefully constructed relationships with neighbors and co-workers would end without explanation. In 48 hours, Elizabeth Morgan would disappear as completely as Sarah Chen had died. But, unlike Sarah's fictional death, Elizabeth's departure would be voluntary and purposeful. For the first time in 6 months, the woman who had been both Sarah Chen and Elizabeth Morgan felt like she was returning to her true nature. Not the grieving veteran hiding in Montana, not the fake fraud who had been publicly humiliated, but the special operations warrior who completed missions that others couldn't handle. Jackson's killers had assumed their betrayal was buried with their victims. They were about to learn that some secrets refused to stay dead, and some ghosts returned to settle scores. The hunt was about to begin. The woman who had been Sarah Chen and Elizabeth Morgan arrived in Washington, D.C., under the identity of Dr. Catherine Walsh, a cybersecurity consultant contracted to review intelligence protocols. The transformation was complete: new appearance, new credentials, and new purpose. But, beneath the corporate attire and professional demeanor was the same special operations warrior who had survived Damascus and carried Jackson's evidence for 3 years. Major Park met her at a safe house in Arlington, where the investigation team had assembled Jackson's research into a comprehensive case file. The evidence was damning: a pattern of intelligence sales spanning 5 years, compromising dozens of operations, and resulting in the deaths of American personnel who had trusted their chain of command.
"We've identified 3 potential suspects," Major Park explained, displaying photographs on a secure monitor. "All have access to special access programs, all were aware of Operation Nightingale, and all have unexplained financial assets." Catherine studied the faces, recognizing each from her previous life. Colonel Patricia Morrison, a strategic intelligence officer who had coordinated logistics for multiple classified operations. General Robert Hayes, who oversaw special operations funding and resource allocation. And Admiral Thomas Richardson, who had orchestrated Catherine's own disappearance from federal custody. Admiral Richardson? Catherine's voice carried shock and disbelief. "I know it's difficult to accept. He helped create your new identity, gained your trust, positioned himself as your protector." Catherine felt the world shifting beneath her feet. Richardson had been the one person she thought she could trust, the officer who had recognized her service and sacrificed his own reputation to protect her. The possibility that he had been responsible for her teammates' deaths was almost incomprehensible. What evidence points to Richardson? Major Park displayed financial records showing large deposits in offshore accounts linked to shell corporations. The timing corresponds with major operations that were subsequently compromised. The amounts match what we'd expect someone to pay for advance intelligence on American special operations. What about Morrison and Hayes? Similar patterns, but Richardson's access was broader. He knew details about Operation Nightingale that the others couldn't have obtained through normal channels. Catherine forced herself to examine the evidence objectively, pushing aside personal feelings about Richardson's apparent betrayal. The financial records were convincing, but something about the pattern bothered her. "Major, may I review Jackson's original research?" "Of course. What are you looking for?" Catherine spent several hours analyzing Jackson's methodology and conclusions. Her teammate had been thorough and professional, but he had been investigating from within the system, relying on official records and established communication channels. "Jackson made one crucial error," Catherine announced. "He assumed the betrayal was coming from someone acting independently. But what if it was a coordinated effort involving multiple personnel?" Major Park leaned forward. "You think more than one person is involved? Look at the operational details. No single individual would have access to all the information that was compromised. But if Morrison handled logistics, Hayes controlled funding, and Richardson provided operational oversight, together they could have sold complete intelligence packages." The realization transformed their understanding of the investigation. Instead of hunting a single traitor, they were looking at a conspiracy that required coordination between multiple high-ranking officers. "If you're right, then we're dealing with something much larger than individual corruption." Catherine nodded grimly. "And much more dangerous. A network like this would have contingency plans, including elimination of threats like Jackson. And, like you. Which means they probably know I'm back in Washington." As if summoned by her words, Catherine's secure communication device vibrated with an encrypted message. "Dr. Walsh, Admiral Richardson would like to schedule a meeting regarding your consultation contract. Tomorrow, 1400 hours, Pentagon Conference Room C-247. Catherine showed the message to Major Park, who immediately recognized the implications. "It's a trap. They know who you really are. Maybe. Or maybe Richardson wants to recruit me into their network now that I'm officially dead and have no ties to any official agency. Either way, that meeting is a death sentence." Catherine smiled for the first time since arriving in Washington. "Not necessarily. Sometimes the best way to catch conspirators is to let them think they're catching you." The plan they developed over the next 18 hours was risky but elegant. Catherine would attend the meeting with Richardson, but Major Park's team would provide surveillance and backup. More importantly, Catherine would wear recording devices that could capture evidence of the conspiracy. "If Richardson tries to recruit you, get him to admit his involvement in selling intelligence," Major Park instructed. "If he tries to kill you, we'll be ready to intervene." Catherine checked the concealed recording equipment and reviewed her cover story. Dr. Walsh was supposed to be a legitimate consultant with no knowledge of special operations or classified programs. Playing that role while extracting confessions would require all her training in deception and manipulation. The Pentagon at 1400 hours was as imposing as Catherine remembered from her previous life. Richardson waited in conference room C-247, looking exactly as he had during her federal custody interview 6 months earlier. But now Catherine saw him through different eyes, watching for signs of deception and threat assessment. Dr. Walsh, thank you for meeting with me on such short notice.
Admiral Richardson, your message mentioned something about expanding my consultation contract?
Richardson gestured for her to sit, his manner friendly but watchful.
Catherine, I think we can dispense with the pretense. I know exactly who you are. Catherine's pulse quickened, but she maintained her professional demeanor. I'm not sure what you mean, Admiral. Sarah Chen. Lieutenant Commander, Navy SEALs. Presumably deceased as of 6 months ago.
The moment of truth had arrived.
Catherine could continue the charade, but Richardson's knowledge made that pointless.
Instead, she shifted to a different strategy.
If you know who I am, then you know why I'm here. Richardson's expression grew serious. Actually, I'm not certain I do. Your presence in Washington suggests either remarkable courage or remarkable stupidity. Maybe both. But I have questions that need answers. About Operation Nightingale? Catherine nodded.
About why my teammates died.
About who sold them out. About why Jackson was murdered for investigating intelligence leaks.
Richardson was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with the intensity she remembered from their first meeting. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone about to reveal dangerous truths. Sarah, what I'm about to tell you is classified at levels beyond anything you've previously encountered.
The betrayal of Operation Nightingale was not what you think it was. Then, tell me what it was. Richardson stood and activated a device that would block electronic surveillance. Catherine's recording equipment went silent, but she memorized every word that followed. Operation Nightingale was deliberately compromised, Richardson explained.
The Syrian chemical weapons facility was bait in a larger operation designed to identify and eliminate a Russian intelligence network that had been penetrating American special operations.
Catherine felt the room spinning around her. You're saying my teammates were sacrificed as part of a different mission?
Your teammates were heroes who knowingly accepted a mission with low survival probability in order to protect hundreds of other American personnel from ongoing betrayal.
Knowingly? Richardson nodded grimly.
Rodriguez, Williams, and Jackson all understood that Operation Nightingale was likely a one-way mission. They volunteered because stopping the Russian intelligence network was worth the risk.
Catherine's world was collapsing and rebuilding simultaneously. But Jackson was investigating intelligence leaks. He discovered evidence of betrayal.
Jackson was investigating the cover story we created to protect the real operation. His job was to build a case against fictional American traitors in order to convince the Russians that their penetration was succeeding. The truth was more complex and painful than Catherine had imagined. Her teammates hadn't been betrayed by their own command structure, they had been sacrificed as part of a larger strategy to protect American interests.
Admiral, if that's true, then why was Jackson killed? Richardson's expression grew dark.
Because Jackson discovered that the Russian intelligence network was real, not fictional. Someone had been selling American secrets, and Jackson's fake investigation had uncovered genuine treason.
Catherine finally understood the horrible irony.
Jackson had been tasked with creating false evidence of betrayal, but, in the process, he had discovered actual betrayal by different personnel.
Who was really selling intelligence? Colonel Morrison and General Hayes.
They thought Jackson's investigation was targeting them specifically, so they had him killed to protect themselves.
And you knew this?
I suspected it, but I couldn't prove it without Jackson's evidence. Evidence that died with him. Catherine reached into her jacket and removed the USB drive Jackson had given her 3 years earlier.
Not all of it.
Richardson stared at the device as if it were a live grenade.
You've had Jackson's real research this entire time?
He gave it to me the night before he died.
Said it was insurance.
Sarah, that drive contains enough evidence to expose the entire Russian intelligence network and convict Morrison and Hayes of treason.
But it also contains information that could compromise dozens of ongoing operations if it becomes public. Catherine understood the choice she was being asked to make. Justice for her teammates' deaths, or protection of current operations and personnel. Admiral, I have a proposal. I'm listening. Morrison and Hayes face justice for their crimes.
Their victims' families learn the truth about their deaths. The Russian network is dismantled.
But the specific details of Operation Nightingale remain classified. Richardson considered the proposal. That would require careful coordination between multiple agencies and precise control of information release. But it's possible? It's possible. But, Sarah, if you pursue this course, you can never return to civilian life. Too many people will know your true identity. Elizabeth Morgan dies as completely as Sarah Chin did. Catherine had expected this consequence. Seeking justice for her teammates would require sacrificing the anonymity that had protected her. Admiral, my teammates died believing they were protecting their country. The least I can do is make sure their deaths actually meant something. Over the following weeks, Catherine worked with a joint task force to build cases against Morrison and Hayes that could be prosecuted without revealing classified operational details. The process required careful redaction of evidence and coordination with intelligence agencies to protect ongoing operations. Morrison and Hayes were arrested simultaneously, charged with espionage and conspiracy. Their convictions sent shockwaves through the defense establishment but were reported as isolated incidents rather than part of a larger Russian intelligence operation. The families of Rodriguez, Williams, and Jackson received visits from military representatives who explained that their loved ones had died during classified operations that had protected American lives. The details remained classified, but the heroic nature of their sacrifice was finally acknowledged. Catherine testified at both trials, her identity protected by closed hearings and sealed court records. Morrison and Hayes each received life sentences in federal prison, their military honors stripped and their names erased from honor rolls. The Russian intelligence network was systematically dismantled through carefully coordinated operations that appeared unrelated to each other. Assets were arrested, communication channels disrupted, and penetration attempts neutralized. Justice was served, but it came at a personal cost that Catherine had anticipated. She could never again disappear into civilian anonymity. Too many people knew her true identity and her role in exposing the conspiracy. Admiral Richardson offered her a position within the intelligence community, working on operations similar to those that had defined her original naval service. They died protecting other Americans from betrayal. Even if the world never knows their names, their sacrifice mattered. Catherine accepted the position, understanding that she would spend the rest of her career in the shadows, protecting national security through operations that could never be acknowledged. But she would do so with the knowledge that Rodriguez, Williams, and Jackson had died as heroes, and that their deaths had ultimately exposed the very betrayal they had been sent to investigate. The woman who had been falsely accused of stolen valor had proven her honor in the most definitive way possible, by ensuring that authentic heroes received the justice they deserved, even when that justice could never be celebrated publicly. In a small ceremony attended only by cleared personnel, Catherine was presented with a medal that would never appear in her official record, for service that would never be acknowledged publicly. But, as she accepted the honor, she felt the presence of her fallen teammates, finally, at peace knowing their sacrifice had protected the country they loved. Some stories end with public recognition and celebration. Others end in classified conference rooms with handshakes from people whose names can never be revealed. Catherine's story belonged to the second category, but it was no less meaningful for its secrecy. She had been arrested as a fraud, died as a lie, lived as a ghost, and, finally, found redemption as a protector of truths too dangerous for daylight. It was exactly the kind of ending that Rodriguez, Williams, and Jackson would have understood and approved. The woman who had worn a uniform she couldn't prove she'd earned had finally earned the right to wear it forever, even if the world would never know her name.